Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Culture Chat. What is the meaning of the word Sifu or Shifu? Kung Fu practitioners around the world have used this term to describe their teachers, but what does it truly mean to be a Kung Fu Sifu? Oscar Agramonte and I have a conversation about what the word Sifu means to us and how it relates to the Walum Kung Fu system. I always enjoy my conversations with Oscar, and I'm grateful for listener questions on one of our favorite subjects. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support with a donation, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Oscar. Welcome back to Culture Chat.
Hello, Mimi. Is the double hello important?
It's just kind of a habit, I think.
Okay, got it.
Well, we've had a few requests to talk a little bit more about Kung Fu.
Something that we both enjoy.
Yes.
Which is very nice.
Something we both enjoy. So for our listeners out there who are martial arts practitioners, we thought a fun and interesting subject was really discussing the word Sifu or Shifu, if we're speaking Mandarin, and kind of just digging into that a little bit because there are many people who now kind of go by this title. But back in the day, it was a very, much more rare occurrence to be an actual martial art or Kung Fu Sifu, right? Like that really wasn't, every single person at like a tournament wasn't a Sifu, like how we see now. So I thought we would dissect this a little bit and kind of jump into it.
Let's dissect.
Okay.
That's one of my favorite music podcasts, by the way.
All right, so dissecting the word itself, whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese, is of course two different characters, which is a skilled person or teacher, and one character is also father. So it's kind of interesting because there are other interpretations of the word and everything as well, but basically when you kind of put them together, it's like your teacher or father. And that's kind of what we've always said, okay, when we ask the students, what does it actually mean? Of course, now we don't just say father, we just say teacher because there are now female Sifus, which wasn't the case before.
There are a few that I know.
Yes. So basically, it's interesting because I recently reread, because I recorded the read lecture book that my father wrote, or rather that was a translation of several lectures that he gave in the 70s. And one of the passages in that, of course, talks about what a Sifu is, and I'm just going to kind of read that as our jumping off point here. And the quote is, "It is possible for you to get married and get divorced several times in your life. However, once you become a disciple of your Sifu, the relationship is binding for the rest of your life. The same way as you would treat your own parents, that is how delicate and involved the relationship is between them." So it's obviously a lot more than when you go to school and you have a teacher per se.
Well, definitely in the traditional sense and in the sense that was taught by Master Chan. So if you have studied under him and then you read the lecture book, or even read the Walum handbook, or you've taught class or taking Walum classes every day, we're kind of reciting these etiquettes all the time, these mantras all the time. And so I think you would think that was ingrained in you if you were a practitioner, but it's important to note that not every Kung Fu school does that. And probably not every martial arts school. There's some that really kind of respect the tradition and follow the tradition, and then there's others who look at it more for the athletic endeavors or competition aspects. And so I guess it just depends on how you approach it.
Right. And I mean, and that's why one of the reasons we at Wallam in particular describe ourselves as traditional Chinese Kung Fu.
Correct. Right. Let's say we are in the office at the Wallam Temple, and someone comes in and is looking for whatever. They're not sure what they're looking for. Our What we cater to specifically is traditional, authentic Chinese Kung Fu. And if someone is looking for something other than that, after we've kind of gone through what that means, then we're also kind of happy to say, well, there's other options that are out there, right? It's not like there's one path and everyone has to follow that path. But with that being said, if you have taken that path for a while, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30 plus years, then the hope would be that those values that you followed would be ingrained.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that you describe it to someone who knows nothing about the Chinese martial arts or the tradition is I've heard you say many times how you describe, well, here at Wallam, you're not just going to get to learn weaponry or forms. Like there are so many other facets of it, and I'd like you to kind of go through like that little
like
pitch that you normally give people.
Oh yeah, what I've said before is let's say someone comes and says, "Hey, listen, I hear that you guys do like kickboxing style fighting, like, and I'd like to do that." And I'm like, "Well, we have aspects that teach that, but wanted to reiterate that what we do is traditional Chinese Kung Fu, and there's a lot that's involved with that. So you have the tradition, you have the martial art forms, you have weaponry, you have self-defense, you have the fighting aspect. There's all of that that's involved. So it's like when you go to school, it's like you're in high school, you have to take math, English, science, history. You don't have a choice. You have to take all of that. And so there's years that you have to take to kind of accomplish that. You can't just go to high school and say, you know what? I only like math. Forget about English, forget about history, forget about science, only math. And so that's kind of the way we explain it with people who come in to watch or who are interested in Wallam Kung Fu. And so that path does take longer. It's a longer path. Obviously, my belief, and it could definitely be a biased belief, is that it's a richer path. It's a more enriching path. But again, as I said earlier, it's going to depend on the person.
Yeah, and so kind of delving into what is the meaning of a Sifu, a lot of people think basically what it means is you're really advanced and you take the test then to be certified to teach, and that you're now just an instructor. So it's almost like a college degree per se.
Right. I guess so. You're saying that some people think that that's what that means.
Correct. That's a common thought.
A common misperception. Is that a right word?
Misconception.
Misconception. Yeah, I was like, they perceive that, but they're wrong. Misconception. I think it's a common misconception. Your father, so Master Chen has often said, you're a Sifu, your students make you a Sifu. Right? So, and so it's interesting because you and I have been talking a little bit about leadership this week as well. So Sifu has a much deeper meaning, as you said. There's the familiar, when you look at Chinese martial arts, the institutions that were formed around it were military, were familial, were the religious aspects, like that was all in it. So it's a very deep part. But if you take your father, Master Chen's example of what is a Sifu? A Sifu is when you have students. Your students make you a Sifu. So like if you're a leader, do you make leaders, and do you make, are you enriching people's lives? That's what is part of it that makes that. I think that's a big part of it. It's not just taking a test and learning material. And so if you are then taught something, you are entrusted to teach that, and you're diligently honoring that, then I consider that being more in the case of a Sifu rather than just being a test.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are really curious in particular how Wallam works. So for our listeners, there's traditional Chinese Kung Fu. There's a lot of different styles and systems. And within each one of them, they have kind of their own way of how they operate and how they structure themselves. But if we're just talking like, let's say back in the old days of old China, there's a Sifu and that's the teacher and that's it. There isn't several branches of schools that gets opened under that Sifu, and they don't certify people under them to be called a Sifu. And this is kind of more a modern day structure of how to proliferate an art, in particular under Wallam. So within the Wallam system itself, you'll notice there's a lot of Sifus. And then, for example, a lot of other styles have done the same, like Yi's Hungar, for example, has, their grandmaster, and there's several Sifus that own branches of that same system. And so you'll see, like in modern Kung Fu, that there are several Sifus, right? But there's still really just one grandmaster. There's really just one parent of kind of everything that's kind of in charge of everything or overseeing, and the one that we would all, if we were in ancient China, consider like that's just the main Sifu. We're all just under him as older Kung Fu brothers and sisters. So essentially, we give a title out of respect for those that are heading a school and operating that on their own independently and as part of, a new branch of the tree. But ultimately, if we were talking about ancient times, we're all still just older Kung Fu brothers and Sihings, which are elder Kung Fu brothers and sisters, which are Sihings and Sijas, right? So it's interesting because, like you said, the terminology is very familial. So at the Wallam Temple in particular, and all Wallam schools, the Sifu is like the parent of the school, and then the assistants and instructors are the older Kung Fu brothers and sisters. And so everything has kind of a familiar relationship. So you're either siblings, or if, for example, our school in Boston, we consider our students and their students Kung Fu cousins, right? And so everything is very familial in nature. But I think there becomes a lot of confusion as we've modernized, because the terminology, everyone gets confused. Well, and this can go down a huge rabbit hole of generations as well, right? So my father is the 6th generation of the Wallam Tom Tui Northern Premium system. So he's pretty much the grandmaster of the style, and that has been passed down, of course, from our great grandmaster Lei Quan Shan. And so that's where our lineage kind of comes from. And then from there, you have Sifus under him, which would be 7th generation. So let's just take you and I even in particular, right?
Great examples.
So I'm a 7th generation Wallam instructor. I would consider myself as one of my father's students. And so there actually are only a few of us kind of in this category now, because we really have a lot of 8th generation instructors, as well as even 9th generation. So it's really interesting because as the system grows, we not only have more schools and Sifus, but we also have like kind of a generational tree going on, right? So on our Wallam website, you can kind of see what that looks like. And so therefore, another school, their quote-unquote Sifu may be my niece or nephew.
Right. They
may not actually be, they wouldn't call me, their students would call me like great aunt, for example, so it's really like confusing.
They would call you my young auntie.
A little Shaw Brothers throwback there. So it can be very confusing for people. I mean, you've been around a long time, and so it's very innate to you. And also, if you're of the Chinese culture, it's already going to be familiar, because that's kind of how you refer to your aunts and uncles, by their elder, or if they're older than your parent or younger than your parent. So you're kind of already used to that, instilled in the culture of how you address the actual name. The word aunt and uncle are different. You actually have a different terminology, which indicates the generation. And so it's super, super clear and distinct in Chinese, which is, I think, really cool, actually. I enjoy that aspect of it, but it does get very confusing. So, for example, a lot of our 8th generation instructors, they just call everyone Sifu because it's easier, but I really don't want to lose that kind of tradition for people to understand the different generations, because then things get lost, right? And then there becomes that kind of deeper meaning of that relationship. And it's not about like rank. It's more about that respect of kind of keeping that tradition alive.
Yeah, I think this is a challenge now with the propagating of Walam specifically. How then do you keep the tradition in a increasingly untraditional world, and then also how do you make it clear the layers, the generations, and it's challenging. I think it's challenging, and for your part, that's the big thing that you're trying to communicate by having, through your father's direction, continuously having us all be connected. Everyone who's part of the Walam family. So the instructors, the assistant instructors, the different school owners and school Sifus, trying to keep that communication and connection. And it's something that we have to learn how to adapt to, because, like you said, it's not the way that it used to be. But at the same time, how do you do that, adapt, and maintain the tradition? I don't know. So the experiment is still going on. You're a 7th generation Walam Sifu. I'm an 8th generation, right? I'm a generation below you. I'm technically your student who became certified to be a Sifu. But really, it's a title given to me by Grandmaster Chan. But really, I'm a student at the Walam Temple, so I'm still under you and Sifu 2, who are instructors there and who are still under him, right? And I don't know, it can definitely get confusing. It's pretty clear to me because I'm around, but that's where this is again coming to, okay, what makes a Sifu, right? Are you being a good leader? Are you communicating effectively? Are you consistently trying to do the right thing? And I don't know if we always succeed, but the attempt is there.
Well, I wrote a blog about this a few years ago, and every time we have our instructor test, which is every 3 years, it really kind of resonates in my head. It's something I think about. And one of the things beyond the complication of a family tree is there's just that straight lineage of Sifu and student. And I've outlined, not just in the documentary and in writings and in Master Chan's writings, he's outlined it, that that relationship is truly a sacred, almost, and very important relationship that's very hard to explain to non-martial, non-Chinese Kung Fu, really, because ultimately in the olden days, there would be a discipleship, and so that's pretty much like almost like being adopted.
Right.
And I think in my documentary, very dramatically, if you broke the law, your Sifu would be the first one they would come after, because basically they're the ones that's responsible for you. They're the ones that would affect you the most, because it was the person that was closest to you, even more so than your parents, in a sense, right? Because you're really taken in by this person who is not just your mentor, but your parent, right? So it's such a hard word to articulate in the English language. It's so clear in Chinese, and it's been really interesting thing to try to explain to people, that kind of relationship. And often it's really misunderstood, and students often misunderstand it as well. They think it's just kind of a polite terminology for Mr. or Mrs., like you would in school, and of course our our general population students, of course, we have a Sifu student relationship. There's respect. They learn a lot about the philosophy of Walam. They learn a lot about the traditions. But really, that relationship comes into play a lot more once a student has been there well over 5-10 years and are, perhaps assisting or being a greater role in the organization. And that's the relationship. I think that's very delicate. And often times, just like children take parents for granted, you and I can raise our hands and attest that we're equally as guilty of this, but the Sifu is often taken for granted and taken advantage of. And I use my father as an example of what I've seen these past 50 years of his Walam experience, and the people who would kneel down in front of him and proclaim how life-changing he's been or how life-saving he's been in many of these instructors' lives, where their parents had neglected them and he's taken them in and often trained them with just out of the goodness of his heart, or the lens that he's gone through with a lot of individuals. And then not even a year later, they've turned around and self-proclaimed themselves their own master of their own style and are literally teaching Walam Kung Fu under some sort of other name. So the worst ones actually try to still use the Walam name, but because it is indeed America, there's a copyright infringement at least. But to me, it's not the legality, it's the morality and the lack of respect, and clearly not understanding what that word means and what that relationship should mean.
Yeah. It's hard to bring that up and not get upset.
Because, but why do you feel that way? Why do you get upset?
Well, right, we all make mistakes, right? There's nobody that's perfect. But as I said earlier, it's very clear what the correct etiquette is for if you're a practitioner of Walam Kung Fu. And you even said, well, that relationship doesn't really almost begin or start to really deepen after 5 or 10 plus years. So what's frustrating is when someone's training in Walam, a lot of maybe as your father's students or students of students, right? And to get to the level of the instructor certification of a Walam Sifu, you're talking probably on average 10 years at least or more, right?
Yeah,
you have some who are more or less, right? But usually more, but let's just make that as so you've spent 10 years studying this art, right? Then you go in and you do a certification, which is really kind of this more. It's more of a getting together and practicing together and bonding, fellowship, the camaraderie, more than just this actual test. So all this happens, and I've been there where there's a thing that you guys do at the test, which is towards the end, hey, tell us a little bit about what you thought about the weekend of this 3-day test. And I've been there where people are saying, oh, this is great, I'm so proud to be a Walam instructor now, and training with Master Chan, training with so and so, and I can't wait to propagate this style. And literally they say that to your father's face. Go home, wait around for their certificates to be mailed, and have probably already these pre-done letters saying, oh, you know what, we're leaving Walam. We're going to do our own thing. However, because the typical person who's going to go into their place to train is not going to know the whole backstory. They're going to see a certificate of as an instructor. They're not going to know the backstory. And this person or persons are then going to continue teaching Walam Kung Fu. But yet do it on their own. I don't know. It's just crazy. It's like the what we say at the altar about respect and learning and humility and control and all this, and then you're just gonna still do your own thing. You've got your school in Tampa, and then all of a sudden now you're gonna change it and make it whatever you're going to name it, but still teach the same stuff because you don't really know anything else, and then disassociate yourself that way.
Well,
so that's very frustrating.
Yeah, and this is something that used to really, really, I mean, I wouldn't sleep for weeks. I'd be really upset because I felt like it would just be like a dagger in my father's back every single time. And I would always ask him how he deals with this, how he's able to handle this. And he always says, like, he knows who he is and he knows what's right, and at the end of the day, they should know who they are. And I go, I think that's giving way too much credit to people because I don't feel like they know who they are. Because here's the thing, I would actually respect it if someone left and then they went and literally was like a yoga instructor, or now I'm a gymnastics coach, or I'm going to do a totally different art form and learn that and do that. The hurtful part is that they try to pass off Wallam as their own. So then not only are they not doing things in the traditional sense, in the respectful sense, but they're also frauds because they're basically stating that they are the innovators and inventors of whatever it is they're teaching. And even worse so is my father in particular has been so unbelievably generous with allowing Wallam instructors and students to train and learn from esteemed masters from all over the world who would normally not teach anybody. Yeah. But they do so because of the relationship my father has with them. They do so open and willingly because of that. And their names have then been, posted on websites or posted on Facebook forums as if they were some sort of disciple of these masters, and all they did was take a 2-hour seminar. And I think the public, like you said, don't know. And I fear that listeners are going, well,
these guys are
pretty bitter.
But also
upset.
They may not, you and I are speaking to each other and it's very clear what we're saying. But
yeah.
Some of the people might be listening like, what the hell are they talking about? so like, let's take, there's a bunch of different things that were said there. One is you have people who, and I think it's also important to know that like when you become at like the assistant instructor level, a certain level at Wallam, there's paperwork that we sign saying, hey, this is material and information that you're learning that is specific, proprietary to Wallam. Do you agree to it? They sign it, yes. They continue their journey of learning. Years later, continue like accumulating that, but they sign that. We sign that paperwork every 3 years when we become instructors, right? And yet after that, they still go and do all these things that we mentioned. So what's the bigger fraud? Is the bigger fraud the person who decides to go do their own thing and still calls it Wallam outright, and then you have to kind of call them and say, hey, you're not Wallam anymore, so you can't do that? Or is it worse to say, I'm going to change the name, but I'm going to still teach Wallam? But now it's, Joe's martial art, or I don't know, whatever it's called, right? Or is it worse to then teach something simplified, like a simplified karate style, and then secretly tell your students, hey, you know that Wallam place that's very popular and traditionally well known? I'm going to teach you all that in an advanced curriculum that I'm going to charge you more for. Like, there's people in Texas who do that stuff, right?
Absolutely.
And there's people in our backyard, like here in Florida, that have come and visited the temple, and it's sort of like a those people know that they're teaching Wallam without in an incorrect way, in an immoral way, in a fraudulent way. But they're poor students who are some of them, very dedicated or loving the style, have no idea, because they're getting information not from Wallam Kung Fu Temple. They're getting information from a former student of Grandmaster Chan, who then taught another student, who now this student says, hey, by the way, we have a connection to Wallam, and here's what it is. And so I don't know so that's just one level of all the stuff that's out there. So I don't know. I mean, again, it's hard. It's really hard. I said this earlier. It's hard to say this and not be angry, and it's probably hard to say it and not sound emotional or bitter. And we don't really spend too much time thinking about it, but it's
contrary to how this podcast is sounding so far.
But it is frustrating. It's
Well,
frustrating.
yeah, because when we were kind of asked to kind of talk a little bit more about tradition and Chinese Kung Fu and history, I think it is important for people to know it's not all just this wonderful mystical art that, we get to learn, and that it's good for your health and all these things. There are politics in it just like anything else, and there are problems with it just like anything else. And I think what's really important is if you really understood the meaning of the word Sifu, and if you really respected that relationship, then these things would not happen. So therefore, I just tend to gravitate towards the theory that there wasn't ever any respect, and maybe there was always like an evil intent or bad intent or malicious intent. But also, I think it's trying to keep that tradition in a modern society like America, where in America you get the problem is, I think they see it as getting a college degree. So you get your college degree, and therefore you're allowed to go be a doctor now, and you're allowed to go be an accountant now. You have a license, and that's it. You don't have to then continue. Well, I mean, a lot of places actually have continuing study, but it's not the same. Like you're talking about a tradition and a family style. Like literally, it's a family style. Like in ancient China, wouldn't have been allowed to learn, right? So in a modern world, this is one of the great things is as a female, I get to learn Kung Fu. As in the modern world, my father opened this up to non-Asians, non-Chinese people, which would not have happened in a non-modern world, right? So we're like, there are pros and there are cons, but the cons come in where the mentality of an average person who doesn't have a greater interest in understanding the culture and learning is that I learned this, I can take it, and it's mine.
Yeah.
And that philosophy and mindset makes for really horrible Sifus, because in order to be a Sifu, you're likely a student first. And if you forget that you're a student, then that whole chain is broken, right? That circle is broken, where you think you're better than you are, and you think that everything is owed to you, and that you've quote unquote earned it, and then it's yours to do with as you please.
Right. I think this is where we're lucky that you and I say, you know what, so-and-so needs to get checked. Blank person. And luckily we get checked all the time because we're around your parents. Mm-hmm. We get checked where we're like, oh, I guess that was probably not the best avenue to do this. So there's times where we have probably been wrong and been checked. And then there's other times where maybe we weren't necessarily wrong, but because of the respect level that you have for your elders, you go, okay, let me approach this way. So there's this we're like constantly trying to learn. Like we fail, we learn, we get a little success, we celebrate, then we fail again and we learn. And so that is the benefit of having someone like your father, like Master Chan around, or having that the head of the organization that you can have. But when you then take certain people who then go off and do their own thing, that's it. They are no longer checked. So ego can get really out of control. Your memory, if you're not having conversations to say like this open two-way dialogue to say, hey, this is how I remember it, your brain is going to remember it with you as the hero always. And so I think that a lot of these people that we've mentioned, and it's hard because you want to be respectful as far as like not calling out names, but then at the same time it's hard to not sound cryptic, right? But so some of these instructors that we're mentioning probably think they initially may have thought that they have done something wrong, but as years go by, or maybe not even years, it could be just months go by, they may think, nope, I was right, because you can change that dialogue once you don't get checked anymore.
Yeah.
Right? You're no longer checked, so you can. And I know for a fact that I've done that in my own personal history. Right? You go back and you tell a story, and then you tell it again, and it slightly starts changing, and the arc starts bending towards you being the hero. And I can just see that very easily happening with a former Walam Sifu still teaching Walam, and they've warped this story in their mind to make it so that we're right, that what they're doing is right. Except when we see them in a tournament or when we have a conversation face to face, right? Which is why, again, it's important to have, this is the power of having the community of Wallam as we have it now. So like some of the Wallam senior instructors, yourself, Sifu George, Sifu 2, Sifu Bob, right? Like that kind of community that you guys have, and that dialogue and brotherhood, fellowship that you have, it allows for more clarity because of the connection. But once you disassociate, like your dad uses his fingers sometimes, right? And he puts his 4 fingers together and says, this is really strong. You can't break this. That's how Wallam is. And then the other Sifus are that thumb that's sticking out. You can just grab it and break it off. So it's weak. It's not only that they're wrong and we can accuse them of being fraudulent, but it's also weaker.
Yeah.
What the hell did I just talk about? I just went all over the place.
I don't know, but when you're talking about your hands, all I could think about was that whole Genghis Khan with the arrow, and like you break one arrow, and then you could take a stack of arrows and try to break them, but there's the power of family and the power of having that unity and being together and being on the same page. And just to kind of wrap it all in as the topic of what we were really talking about is, what is the meaning of Sifu? What does it mean to be a traditional Kung Fu Sifu? Is equal part learning, equal part responsibility, because you are still a student first, and then at the same time you are in a position where you are a parent to students, and so your responsibility goes well beyond teaching Kung Fu. As any Wallam Sifu or any Sifu of any other style will tell you, your involvement with your students it goes deep. It goes beyond just, okay, we're gonna just do some kicking and punching. I mean, there are times where you've picked kids up from school, or you get them out of jail or out of trouble, or all these crazy things. You counsel them in so many ways. You're so involved in their lives. You help them get into college. You really take a greater learning. And I know there are a lot of amazing teachers out there that do this for their students as well, not in the martial world, but what we're trying to kind of articulate is that meaning of that martial art, that Kung Fu Sifu really, really is a different type of relationship than any other sport I've ever seen in any other capacity. And it's just such a hard thing to define, even though we've spent the last 35 minutes trying to define that now. It is truly, truly challenging.
Well, I think, so this is what's maybe one of the ways you can think about this too is to remember, as you said, that we're a student first. Mm-hmm. So as a Sifu, as a teacher, you agree, I am a student first of Kung Fu, right? And so then when you go into the school, we practice as the first rule of the school is good bowing gesture, bowing. So as soon as you go into the training hall, the first thing is you bow. When you see your Kung Fu family, your instructors, your Kung Fu brothers and sisters, you bow. It's not only a recognition of, hello, I'm here, but also our first level of respect, our first step towards being respectful. And I am not the best at doing that all the time when you're there all day. So it's something that we've worked on. But the thing is to be conscious of it and also to continue to work on it. And I think if we can just think of that rule of let's get 1% better every day, then we will all benefit from that.
So we've been a little bit, I don't want to say negative, but a little bit testy during this, because it's a very sensitive subject. Because when you and I think about what is a Sifu, and I think about my Sifu, which is of course my father, and hopefully you're thinking about me, but essentially we're super protective over those that we love and that we care for. So like you do feel like you would really defend your Sifu's honor, like you would do whatever you needed to do to defend your Sifu's honor. And so I think I get very defensive, but at the same time it's more protective, I think, than defensive. Mm-hmm. But on a brighter note, I've also seen the reverse, where even though one is no longer practicing Kung Fu, they will come back and do something really kind for my father because he was their Sifu at one time, or is still their Sifu, even though they don't do Kung Fu, like physically do Kung Fu, but they remember and respect and appreciate the life-changing impact that he's had on them. And in my very short time as a Sifu, I mean, I've been, in comparison to him, it's like a half a lifetime, right? And so I've been a Sifu for over 20 years, but that's still infinitesimal.
Is that right? Can we get a spell check?
It's very small in comparison to the amount of years that my father has been. And so even I've had people who were little kids that come back as adults and tell you how much they appreciate you or how much they appreciate the teachings. And you see people do acts of kindness because of that relationship. And so that's really an inspiring thing as well. I know just school teachers, they must feel like it's the most unappreciative job. We always say, hats off to teachers, educators, because it is really a tough job to be in a position where you have kids who are not fully developed, so do not have the sense perhaps or knowledge yet to realize what you're doing for them, right? And so you kind of accept that. You're teaching, 8th graders or something like that. You're not really expecting this great, feeling of gratitude and all this overwhelming respect, but often you see it happen throughout in the future. Like it comes back, or they're paying it forward. They are now out there in society, heading a nonprofit or doing something really good for other people. And so you hope that your students don't necessarily need to come back and even show you that, but you just hope that they pay it forward and that they are doing good things with the advantages that you've given them.
Yeah, I am constantly trying not to be a jerk towards, let's say, kids that we teach who have done something wrong, because I know that I try to remind myself, when I was their age, I was a total jerk, or I did such stupid things. And so we have to continuously try to remember that, okay, yes, they're making mistakes, but our job as their teacher, as a Sifu, as a leader, whatever, is to lead them, right? Is to help guide them through this. And it's challenging sometimes to do that without anger or resentment, but man, it feels really great when someone comes back after training. Let's say someone trained at Wallam for a couple of years, and you remember them as being like maybe not as enthusiastic during their training time, but then they come back and say, man, I have such fond memories, this place was awesome, you were great, I am now doing this, whatever it is, and you're just like, wow, that feels awesome. And I've made the mistake. I'm making a mental note right now to send some thank yous to people that have helped me out as well, because it really feels good when someone comes back and does that. So if you have 100 students, it's probably likely that only one will come back and thank you. But there's probably 90 of them that really appreciate it and are paying it forward. So I think we can rest easy with that. But maybe we can be the ones that are showing our appreciations as well.
Yeah. I think you and I do that. We do these gratitude letters, not as often as we should or could, but we definitely are.
We've done them.
We definitely believe in them.
Yeah.
And we actually send them by mail and everything. I mean, if there's still going to be mail.
Yeah, we'll see. We're working on it.
I don't know if we want to go down that dark alley. No. that's the Rucka show. That's like right. The Mimi and Greg show. So yeah, to answer listener questions on traditional Kung Fu and what is a Sifu, it's a really hard thing to define, but ultimately, in a short sense, it's that martial art, it's that Chinese Kung Fu tradition of a Kung Fu teacher almost adopting a student into their family and taking on that responsibility of training this individual to pretty much be the best person they can be in every sense of the way, whether it's not just through the physical kung fu training, but as well as learning all of the philosophy and learning all of the moral compass that is something that I think we don't think about enough in our society, and something that maybe we say it really quick. Like you said, at the end of each class, we have respect to our, grandmaster and Sifus and the teachings, learn kindness, learn fellowship, learn hard work, control. Like, we say it all the time, but I don't know if we're really acting on it.
Yeah,
like,
the words don't matter as much as the action.
Exactly. Yeah. Words don't really matter as much as action. And so, but I guess it's the first step.
It's the first step. Do the words. Realize that you're not perfect. When you are attempting to call someone out, realize that you've failed many times. I heard this person say, it's very rare to have someone's compass always pointing north, except, and this is a quote from this guy that I was listening to, except when I met Brian Stevenson. That guy, I think his compass is always pointing.
Well, we love Brian Stevenson here at the Culture Chat. Big Brian Stevenson fans.
So, realizing that we can learn from people like that, and we can also learn not only from our instructors, right? And you take from Grandmaster Chan down, realizing, okay, they're not perfect, but the good does outweigh any negative. And we can learn not only from all the good that they're doing and the positive, but also from the mistakes that they've made. And I don't know. We're all a work in progress.
Absolutely,
we're all a work in progress.
Yeah, and this is a little bit off subject, but not really, because several months, weeks now ago, when all the protests started, from the recent George Floyd murder all the way down through what's happening now, with all the unrest and the systemic racism, and it's been very jarring. And I think back to the late 60s, early 70s, when my father decided to make the decision he made, which was to open the doors to everybody to learn. And it's highlighted in the documentary exactly why he believed this was the right thing to do. One is he moved to America, and this is the place for dreams and freedom and democracy and open-mindedness. And for somebody as traditional Chinese culture-wise as him, to have that progressive thinking, I think is something to celebrate, and that I am really grateful for, because therefore it instilled in me the beliefs I have, which is the reason that, in front of the Wallam Temple, you and I took our knee and we decided, we want to make sure it's very clear that we absolutely believe Black Lives Matter, and we absolutely believe that there should be equality, whether it's for LGBTQ or whether it's for females or whether it's for just equality, right? For everyone. And so lately, we see all of these things happening and people feel like there's a side to take, whereas I really feel like this is the moral compass that, like you said with Brian Stevenson, it's always pointing in one direction. And I feel like as a Sifu, it is also our responsibility to not just be silent or ignore what's going on around us, and to be on eggshells and to try to, quote unquote, make everybody happy. I feel like there is no question, because somebody called and said, wow, thank you for posting that and making us feel inclusive, and thank you for recognizing Black Lives Matter or that movement. And I'm like, well, I don't really see it as a political statement or anything radical or anything. I just see it as a moral statement. And that definitively comes from my Sifu and what I've learned from him. So I think when we think about that tradition, as traditional as we are, a lot of people listen to that word and think that means we're stuck in old times, or we're stuck back in a time where there wasn't a lot of open-mindedness. I think we can still uphold certain traditions and cultures that
improve upon us as people, but at the same time evolve and learn in this modern society so that we can also keep that balance.
And that sounds very challenging, but we are up to the task. Well, what are you going to do? Just sit around and do nothing for the rest of your life, right? The beauty of life comes when you with the perspective of a struggle, right? So like, if there's something that you see that you feel is wrong, don't be afraid to call it out, right? And you can do that in a respectful way. And you talked about kneeling in front of the temple. What is the most respectful thing that you can do? Is bow or kneel. There's nothing that shows more respect than that. Throughout like millennia,
throughout religion, and I mean that's pretty much the sign of respect is when you genuflect,
right.
When you kneel across religions,
right? And and it's instilled in us as martial artists as well. Like our number one rule is that's how you show respect. And there's a difference between like kowtowing and just bowing out of respect. And we're like I said, we're going to continue working on it. By no means are you looking at people who've got it down here. You're looking at you're listening to people who are just working on it.
Work in progress.
We are works in progress.
All right. Well, Oscar, thank you for having this discussion with me today. Listeners, I hope that was along the lines of what you were asking. Otherwise, we will try again and we will work on it. But in all seriousness, we actually really enjoy talking about traditional Kung Fu and some of the philosophies. So please continue to ask us questions and we will do our best to have discussions about them and hopefully give you answers. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.